Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the Clark on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. I'm Kathy Morris. I am the Sylvia and Leonard Marks Director of Collections and Exhibitions and the Curator of Decorative Arts here at the Clark. And it's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce our speaker for today. Lucile Montagne is the Chief Curator at the Mobilier National. She spent 4 years at the Service des Musées de France, the central administration of the Ministry of Culture, where she was in charge of decorative arts, design, and fashion museums. Since 2016, she has been in charge of the contemporary collection at the Mobilier National. It comprises furniture as well as rugs and tapestries created by the national manufactories from the 1960s to the present day. She became head of the curatorial service of Mobilier National in September 2023. She is currently working on a comprehensive catalog of the furniture collection created by the Research and Creation Workshop, which will be published in spring 2025, so very soon. The Mobilier National embodies the prestige of French traditions and the sheer vitality of its artistic creativity. And I think we're in for a treat this afternoon as Lucile gives us a deeper understanding and look at the tapestry tradition, and in particular the tradition of working with contemporary artists within the tapestry factory. So please join me in welcoming Lucile Montagne.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. Such an impressive crowd. I just wanted to thank the Clark Institution, and in particular Kathleen Morris, for welcoming me for this talk. I hope you are going to enjoy. I'm going to talk about how we make a tapestry in the national manufactories at the Mobilier National and present the contemporary history of the medium from the 1940s up to now. And you can ask me every question you have at the end of the talk, so do not hesitate. So, in 1946, Georges Fontaine, the administrator of the Mobilier National, thought about the creation of a workshop within the institution which could request, and I quote, from painters resolutely outside of an academic tradition and carry out experiments. He was launching kind of a new movement at the end of the Second World War, where the national manufactories could actually work with contemporary artists, which was definitely not the case at the beginning of the 20th century, and wanted to have something new in the national manufactory. The Mobilier National is kind of unique as it perpetuates a tradition of textile and furniture creation inherited from Louis XIV, with various workshops actually creating in the 17th century, because the Gobelin manufactory dates from 1662 and the Beauvais manufactory from 1664. So since these dates, the Mobilier National and the national manufactories have been creating contemporary creations up to this day. The idea is that we always ask contemporary artists, the idea is not to make a copy of an ancient tapestry, a 17th century tapestry, but continue on working while it was with the king, with the important painters like Lebrun. With the Emperor Napoleon, it was the same. And nowadays, we are working with contemporary artists every day. It's kind of amazing. And we have a public commission framework where a committee decides which artists we are going to weave and which cartoon we are going to buy and create and transpose into a tapestry, and also in rugs, because we are also making rugs with the Savonnerie manufactory. And we are using this collection. It's kind of quite large. It comprises more than 2,000 tapestries up to this day, and we are using them for exhibitions, but also to furnish government buildings, because we have at the Mobilier National this mission to furnish the institutions, the ministries, the Élysée Palace, and also the French embassies all over the world. So we have a few in New York, in Washington, and so on. So you can find in the French embassies a few parts of our collection. So I'm going to present the process of the creation of a tapestry in the national manufactory. In France, we still have 3 national manufactories, the Gobelins, Beauvais, and Savonnerie. The Savonnerie is actually making rugs, and Gobelins and Beauvais are making tapestries, but we also have private workshops, mainly in Aubusson. But these national manufactories are actually held by the state, and we have public employed people creating these tapestries. So the idea is to perpetuate the tradition and continue with this craft, because it's still handmade and still the same as it was in the 17th century. So this manufactory is actually located in Paris, in the 13th arrondissement. You can see a few photographs of the manufactory. You have in I'm going to say pink and start yellow, sorry, I lose my English. The yellow building is actually the ancient site of the manufactory of Gobelins, where the weavers have been working since the 17th century. And you can see the gallery where we are actually showing exhibition, and there is this site which has been preserved, and you can actually visit it if you come to Paris and see the workshops, where there is also a chapel which was actually built in the 18th century, where the weavers were actually, it was kind of a little town. So since 1826, the only technique used in the manufactory of Gobelins is the high warp, high loom. You can see the loom is vertical, and the weaver is actually using a small bobbin to create the motif. And all these looms, we have a few looms. We have 15 high looms and around 30 weavers in the manufactory of Gobelins. They are mainly women at the time, but in the beginning of the 20th century, it was kind of interesting because it was almost only a male craft, but nowadays it's mainly female because of the textile. It's kind of mainly considered as a feminine action. So you can see the looms. The weaver is always working on the back of a tapestry. You can have a look over there. You can see all the bobbin actually outside the warp, and they can see the cartoon on them. They are actually looking away at the cartoon, and using this technique, I'm going to explain a little bit better afterwards, but maybe I can show a film so you can actually see while I'm talking. So in Gobelins, they are actually drawing the motif on the threads, on the warp threads, to recreate something, and they are just using ink, so they can actually know what they are creating afterwards. And it's not a binary, it's completely handmade, and it's not a binary language, so they can actually mount the colors. You can see it's not a flat line, it actually goes up and down, because they can put every color together, one part after another. And they are actually looking at the real creation, because we are buying cartoons and works of art from all scales, and they are actually using, so the thread is actually knotted, and they are actually pointing with the spindle or bobbin. It's not the same in the Gobelin technique and in the Beauvais technique, but we are going to talk about the Beauvais technique just after a while. In Beauvais, we have two different places. We have a building created in 1969 where you have this time only low looms and low warp. In this building, where there is actually one workshop in Paris, and the second workshop is in Beauvais. The idea at the time when Louis XIV created the manufactory was to have something in the north of Europe, to be avoiding having all the noblemen go to the Flanders to make new tapestries for them. So he wanted to have something in Beauvais, in the north of France, to be creating designs for the noblemen, and he was actually using the design from Gobelins manufactory. They're only using low looms, and it's kind of the same as the technique. They are also working on the back of a tapestry, but this time the warp is flat, and they are using pedals to separate the two plies of warp theft. In the manufactory of Beauvais, they are only using cotton warp, and in Gobelins, it's only wool warp. So it's kind of different, but the result is exactly the same because it's the same knots, and even the weavers cannot say afterwards if it was actually woven on a low loom or on a high loom. So you can see them working. So it's the same kind of knot. They are using a slightly different tool, either a spindle or a bobbin, because it's the same gesture, but not exactly the same with the low or the high warp. And they can put every type of colors on the bobbin. And they're actually, separating the two parts, as you can see. And they are using a mirror underneath to be able to see the motif they are weaving. You can never see the whole tapestry up until the end when it's actually cut. They are using this time a cartoon underneath. You see they can actually use it. They are not painting on the warp, but they are using this cardboard motif to be able to know what they are doing. And you can see all the colors used. So, as I was saying, it's kind of a long process. You just saw the part where they're actually weaving, but in the National Manufactory, it's a long process working with the artists. So the first part of the preparation, it's really a constant dialogue between two universes, between the weaver and the author of the model, because the weaver is not the original creator of the design, but he's not a mere executor. He's just like an interpreter in the noblest sense of the word. And as the painter Brassai wrote, his role is as important as that of the conductor for the composer. The idea, it's like a fruitful dialogue between two persons, sometimes many persons, because there can be a lot of people weaving on the same tapestry, with a chef de pièce. It's really like a composer. He decides what motif he's going to use, which way he's going to recreate and transpose a work of art. In the national manufactories, everything is done from the beginning to the end. So the first part is actually the preparation phase, where the artist and his translator come to an agreement. So they decide how they are going to interpret the piece, the work of art, which can be a painting, a photograph, or so on. Sometimes some artists, we had an artist, a Russian artist, Eric Bulatov. He wanted something completely different from his drawing. He wanted something way brighter. So he was really a dialogue with the weavers to decide what they were doing. The first step with the cartoon is the enlargement ratio, because most of the time the paintings of the original work of art are really smaller than the tapestry. You have seen the exhibition, most of them are actually 4 meters, 5 meters wide sometimes. So nowadays we're actually using photographic enlargement, and sometimes you have to redesign, because when you are working on a small work of art, if you enhance them, it can show details you do not necessarily want in the tapestry. So they decide together what they are going to use. Then they decide in which sense they are going to weave the tapestry, because you can weave in either sense. You do not need to go from bottom to the top. You can go from right to left or from left to right. The idea is that the weaver is actually the one deciding, seeing the design and the motif, where what is going to be difficult, because sometimes it's complex to make a scale, for instance, to have a diagonal, really, it's going to be difficult to have it completely straight, because it's going to be one knot up another one, so it's like tiny stairs. So the weaver decides how it's going to be, and they also decide the type of thread they are going to use, because it can be a large motif. In this case, they can use really large wool or cotton warp, and sometimes they have really tiny details, so they need really thin threads to be able to reproduce every tiny object. When you have, for instance, persons, if you have to draw the face and so on, and the eyes, you need to be extra careful. It's going to be easier if you have like an abstract motif, but obviously it's something of a decision made between the artist and the weaver. And there is the color selection. At the Mobilier National, there is a dyeing workshop where you can see a few pictures. It's the original dyeing workshop of the manufactory, and it has existed on the same site since 1665. And the most famous director was the chemist Chevreul, who stayed on 40 years, and he was actually researching chromatic contrast, and he devised a classification system in the form of a hemispherical space. It was the chromatic circle, which has been used by artists just like Sonia Delaunay, for instance, and it was kind of really important for them. So the weavers actually go to the dyeing workshop and decide with the artists which color they are going to use. They can use colors which has already been dyed or make new ones. Nowadays, we are only using trichromy. We only use the three primary colors, the yellow, the red, and the blue, to create all colors. And there is no complete formation for these, the chemists working in this dyeing workshop. They actually use a lot of things with the eye. They're just comparing all the colors, and they are dyeing the wools for the creation of a tapestry, but also for the restoration of tapestries, because we also have a restoration workshop, so they can sometimes decide what they are going to use. Each year, the workshop dyes an average of 1,322 ounces of wool and around 22 pounds of silk or linen. So it's kind of impressive. And in the color selection, the idea is that you can create new colors, but you also have to think about the whites, because the wool is never completely white. It's always like a slightly beige. So if you want to have a completely white motif, they are using silk or linen most of the time, because it's actually brighter. Sometimes you just have to, be able to decide which color are going to be all around. We have what is called the Nîmes in French. It's actually a color chart center where we keep every color ever created by the dyeing workshop. And you can see it's preserved in two different versions. You either have all the color charts with flat wools, because it's actually how we see the tapestries with the flat knots, and you also have pompon. It's actually the cut wool, which is used for rugs, because we're actually in the savonnerie technique. It's another knot, and even if the color is the same, it can be from the same batch of dyed wool, it will not be exactly the same to the eye, because the color does not reflect the same when it's flat or when it's cut. So we have this really big place where we actually keep every color created. We have nowadays 1,500 colors, so it's kind of kind of impressive. And there is a classification model with 3 dimensions: the hue, the lightness, and the saturation. Nowadays, we are only using chemical colors because actually the natural dyes with plant were actually sometimes toxic, and they were gradually abandoned from 1911 onwards. So nowadays, it's only chemical process to dye the workshop. So now I wanted to have, after this overlook, and I'll be able to answer every question you have about the technique, maybe go back to the different techniques of Beauvais and Gobelins and the differences between the two. But I also wanted to make a small historical explanation because it's actually kind of important how the medium of the tapestry has followed the main upheavals of the contemporary history. And since the dawn of war, and it's actually well explained in the show you may have seen or will see. I really hope you're going to see it afterwards if you haven't done it. So it's kind of interesting. The national manufactories were maintaining a century-old know-how, and they have really accompanied the main upheaval and even what is called the revival of the tapestry. The idea was that around the 1940s mainly, the medium gained a recognition through exhibition. For instance, the landmark retrospective Tapisserie française du Moyen-Âge à nos jours, French tapestry from the Middle Age to nowadays, held at the Museum of Modern Art in Paris in 1946, which was actually a show that was a revelation for a lot of artists, because at the beginning of the 20th century and the end of the 19th century, the medium of the tapestry was not actually well recognized. In 1874, for instance, after the National Manufacture exhibitions, the Goncourt wrote, "Tapestry is a lost art. It is only a dull black imitation of painting." And this observation was widely shared at the end of the 19th century. Everybody was thinking it was just something not as interesting as the painting and not a real art. This is most of the time the case with it was not showing this textile art to its full potential, and a few artists decided at the time, in the late 30s and in the 40s, to recreate a new fashion with some great compositions, and to create, with the manufactory of Gobelins and the manufactory of Beauvais, new creations which were actually redefining the language of tapestry. The idea was to have something that was not a copy of a painting, but really something that was completely new and linked with the medium. And a few artists created what is called the Association des Peintres Cartonniers. It's an association of painters creating cartoons for tapestry. The idea was that you could not have, on the one hand, just a painter or an artist creating a model, and on the other hand, someone weaving without any dialogue between them. And the idea was that some artists decided to create works of art really defined to be transposed into tapestries. And they wanted to go back to what they thought was the main age of the tapestry, which was the Middle Ages, even before the 17th century, where painters were actually working with tapestry weavers. And they wanted to have something a little bit different, something with small palette of colors, borders, to create really something created for the wall. And they actually wanted to have to go back to a formal and more noble era of the tapestry. It was actually a complex time because it was during the Second World War at the time, so they were working mainly at the beginning with the Aubusson workshop, which were actually really concerned about the war, and even the National Manufactory were actually moved during the Second World War in Aubusson, and that created a kind of important dialogue between the two, and the Mobilier National decided to commission a few works of art to be able to relieve this new medium. And you can see here the Asia by Pierre Dubreuil. The idea was to have large commissions and themes dear to traditional tapestries. For instance, this one is actually from a series, The Four Parts of the World and the Four Seasons. The idea was to have not only one tapestry, like a copy of a painting, something small you could just hang on the wall, but have large series, just like in the Middle Ages, where it was actually used to put all around castles and so on, and to have real important composition. And for instance, for this commission, 4 artists were selected. André Lotte and Pierre Dubreuil were actually also making the 4 seasons. And you here have the Asia tapestry, where you could see the borders and the more graphic design of the tapestry, which can be easier to do with the wool and so on. It was the same with Marcel Gromer. And Jean Cassou, for instance, says his rigorous construction, his simplification, his taste for great composition and great fundamental idea, his science as a colorist, all this was to make him one of the most perfect tapestry makers of his time. The idea is that it's easier to have a simpler language, to be able to have something really show in the tapestry, not to have really complex and tiny details on a painting, because as I was saying, when you have something in full scale, it's kind of important to have a really strong composition, and Marcel Gromer was actually one to be able to do this. So in here is actually working for the spring of Paris. The idea was also to have something really important, to have a complete cycle. And it's actually interesting because you can actually see the boats and so on and all the modern life at the time. And this one was actually created in Aubusson manufactory. There were a lot of workshop in Aubusson working with these weavers, and also Lursa, which is actually considered one of the main artists of the revival of tapestries, because he actually created a lot of models and made a lot of reproductions of his tapestries in smaller scales and so on. And you can see in his composition that the shapes are simplified, the number of the color reduced, and you have really large threads to be able to create strong contrast. And this is actually a train, something all these artists were actually creating. You can see also it in tapestries by Jean-Picard Ledoux. The idea of this peintre cartonnier was to really create something of a new language for tapestry, and to have, like I was saying, a small palette. You can see most of them are in green, yellow, or brown colors, and they are using most of the time the same technique, something which in France is called, for instance, the hachure. The idea is to be able to quickly create a motif in tapestry, and the hachure is actually mixing 2 colors with they are actually mixing colors like that, so it's kind of easy to weave because you do not need to completely change the colors every time in the bobbin, and it's actually a really new language which they were advocating to be able to recreate something really important for the tapestry, and which helped a lot reconsidering the medium of the tapestry. It was really an important Renaissance or revival movement, which definitely helped the rest of the tapestry history afterwards, even though some nowadays have a more critical view of this movement. For instance, Albert Greenpass-Nguyen believes that the tapestry revival responds to a system of strict procedures which result in the production of sometimes disappointing works and gives the impression of academic works through the use of a repertoire or repetitive motifs. The idea is that it's kind of always the same technique used, so it's kind of really a complete language for these tapestries, but the idea is that it can be a little bit repetitive sometimes. So this is why at the time, during the 40s and mainly after the Second World War, new languages were also tried, and mainly with the national manufactories and also private enterprises like the one of the gallerist Marie Gutoli, for instance, to have modern artists and well-known artists create tapestries. So it's another possibility, the idea was that at the same time, many things were actually done to be able to recreate a new fashion with tapestries. And after the Second World War, the national manufactories decided to attract contemporary and modern artists creating works of art. And the first commission was actually the one made to Matisse with the woman with the lute, you can actually see in the exhibition, which is one of the main work of art for the national manufactory, kind of important to be able to recreate something new with new artists, and a tendency which is going to be used from the 1960s up to this day in the national manufactory, having well-known artists create tapestries and create motifs. It's kind of really a landmark for the history of tapestry, mainly because it was one of the first, after the Second World War, commissioned to an important artist. Even though at the time he was already well known, the idea was that from the 1940s to the 1960s, the idea was to commission paintings and so on to famous artists, modern artists, which are now shown in the museums, were not at the beginning of this 20th century so well known. And it's also really interesting because of the main part that Matisse took in the process of making this tapestry. I was telling you the peintres cartonniers were actually creating cartoons with numbers and so on to be able to have a language with the weavers. The idea was that Matisse decided not to use the main pattern of his painting. He just didn't want to give a painting and say, okay, you can weave whatever you like. He wanted to be part of the process. This is why he actually took a photograph of his work of art and decided to change a few things. He added a border to be able to make it look like more of a tapestry, like something hung on the wall. And he simplified a few motifs. For instance, the carpet, which was a circular motif, which is kind of more complex to do in weaving, was actually completely changed. And you can see on the right the second version, which was actually the one woven. And it's also interesting because it's the first time that the photographic medium was actually used in the process of making a tapestries. And the idea was that other artists decided to use this as well. For instance, Picasso had actually created this work of art, Women, Les femmes à leur toilette, which is actually nowadays in the Museum Picasso in Paris, but at the time was in his workshop. And the idea was that Picasso did not want the work of art to go outside of his workshop, so the weavers had to come to sample all the colors and so on. And they took a photographic reproduction, at the time in black and white, And when he saw the reproduction in black and white, he said, okay, I also want to have a second version in black and white. So nowadays, we have two tapestries, one in color and one in black and white. And, well, it was kind of really interesting to have this photographic medium put into light, and as it was obviously interesting to have an echo with other works by Picasso, for instance, Guernica in black and white. And from this day, the idea was that there was a dialogue between the artist and the weaver to have something of a common creation. The exact copy of the painter's creation disappears. It's a more subtle interpretation. And artists like Pierrette Bloch in 1975 praised this work of interpretation and says, "Tapestry is another field. I saw a project become an object through the inventive mastery of the weavers. A new kind of share worked. I was a spectator among other remarkably attentive performers. With the shared transposition, the cartoon, in Tapestry, the painter works at the third party. We have to decide together, to rationalize, to get along, to dialogue with another point of view, those of the weavers." And so the weavers have more and more a role in the creation of the tapestry, which was not necessarily the case with the peintre cartonnier, where they decided which color was going to be at which part, and it was more of a mechanical creation. And in this tendency, the idea is to have something more of a dialogue. At the time, in the 1960s, we decided in the National Manufactory to be able to weave a lot of important artists, just like Miro, and they decided really to choose which works of art they were going to create as a tapestry, and in here they decided to weave, for instance, Women with a Mirror, where you can see the national manufactories are following a tradition of themes with the woman with the mirror, just like the lady in the unicorn, where you have this kind of motif, and also a design with a pattern, a border. Most of the time you have to have this kind of easy design to follow and to have something really striking when it's actually enlarged. One of the main artists actually for the creation of tapestry was Le Corbusier, because he actually really rethought the medium. He called the mural of modern times and even found a new name, the mural nomad, to be able to design these tapestries. The idea for him as an architect was that everybody could actually hang a tapestry, roll it up, and put it in a new place, and to have something really shared with the architectural creation. And he said, "In tapestry, I found an opening capable of receiving a part of my mural research, where my vocation as a painter finds its architectonic nourishment." And this obvious interest prompted him to create over 30 cartoons between 1936 and 1975. And there was an important role actually given to Pierre Baudouin, which was in the National Manufactory, an advisor, and he was the one creating a lot of cartoons with Le Corbusier, as he knew the technique. So the idea was to be able to to choose a pattern and to create something really independent of painting, and to create drawings completely done for tapestries. And for instance, Jean Petit, a critic, said, "If Pierre Baudouin hadn't enlarged the models, worked on the tracings, matched the colors, and supervised the weaving in his various workshops, Le Corbusier would certainly not have pursued this work." At the time, the National Manufactory decided also to weave a lot of artists after their death, because the idea was that from the 1960s onwards, they wanted to go back in time and be able to weave the main artist, just like André Derain. This model was actually found in his workshop after his death, and it was supposed to be a mural, so the painting is actually the same size as the tapestry, so this is why it was chosen to be transposed. And it was the same for Fernand Léger, because he was dead at the time, and the tapestry was done with his widow. The idea, of course, is that it excludes any dialogue with the artist, but obviously we were actually choosing artists which had an interest in this kind of field. And for instance, Fernand Léger had already collaborated with some workshops in Aubusson, like Pinton, au Tabar, and it was this work of art, for instance, was originally intended for a large-scale mural decoration project, so it was actually kind of a possible transcription which preserved the strength and the monumentality of the original. So I'm just gonna... After the modern avant-gardes were woven, a new trend arrived in the history of tapestry. The idea was that a revolution chased another, and the introduction of abstraction was a main part of the renewal of the tapestry medium. And all movements were actually represented, whether lyrical abstraction or geometric one, realism, and so on. And the idea in the National Manufactory and in the Mobilier National was to have every trend presented, because the institution is not a museum, so the idea is to have as eclectic a collection as possible, so it can be deposited anywhere. So the arrival of abstraction in tapestry is kind of a second revolution. In 1952, an exhibition at the Denise René Gallery marked the resolute commitment to abstraction in the medium of tapestry, with works woven in Aubusson after Kandinsky, after Herbin or Arp. And the movement was confirmed in 1969 during the 4th International Tapestry Biennale in Lausanne in Switzerland, where the French section only presented abstract artists. In the 1970s, it was also consecrated because the French president, Georges Pompidou, commissioned Jacob Agam, you are actually seeing a tapestry of the artist, to furnish the living room of these private apartments at the Élysée Palace. So it was kind of a recognition of the medium and the abstraction. Many artists were actually creating abstract tapestries. For instance, you have Victor Vasarely, who is kind of interesting because he was actually working on a lot of different mediums, and he said, "I reject the belief in the irreplaceability of the hand, each work being imagined as a plastic idea from which we start, which can provide the origin of either a canvas or a fresco or a tapestry or an architectural integration. Whatever the works that we create, there is always an original, but until now, this original was the final goal of its creator. For me, the original, it's just a starting point." So the idea was that he created a kind of language with geometrical motifs and could use it to every kind of possible medium, whether collage or tapestry of wall hanging. So in the Mobilier National collection, we have geometrical tapestries of different times and so on, even really I don't know how to say it, but really minimalistic version, just like the Geneviève As you can see in the exhibition as well. And opposed to that is kind of the impact also of the lyrical abstraction, where the weavers are actually trying to recreate all the motifs, either the different colors. For Sonia Delaunay, it was kind of interesting because she had been working a lot with tapestry and textile during her former years, the beginning of her career, and now she was actually working later in her career with tapestry creation, and she took really a lot of interest in the creation of a tapestry was she was noting everything down in small notebooks, where she said that we also looked at the enlargement and the way of interpreting the blanks randomly. I leave as little as possible, but I don't want any straight geometric lines, and they must retain the sensitivity of the hand. So she was actually working with the weavers to be able to reproduce some of the sensibility of the work of art at the beginning, which can be seen in other works of art, just like by Masson with a surrealistic vision. The idea was that the texture of the work of art, for instance, here a painting with sand is actually transposed inside the tapestry. So I'm sorry, it's difficult to see on screen, but they were actually trying to reproduce the sand with different kinds of threads and so on. And the tapestry weavers were actually trying to recreate the gesture of the artists. And many artists who were actually trying to work on different mediums, just like Georges Mathieu, who was actually known to realize large painting as performances, and he was like a really gestural creator. And you can see in this really large tapestry how the weavers had realized all these weavings, and the artist had to change his way of thinking because he was mainly creating paintings as performances, and now he had to provide a lot of studies and so on, and to recreate, rethink. For Paul Duchin, he said the artist had to adapt to the small format. He tempers his enthusiasm and engages in multiple preliminary studies, developing the models with the application and care of a good worker. He works in isolation and forces himself to assimilate the discipline of the craftsman, to better understand in his spirit and in his form the object that is expected of him. It is with humility and respect that he learns the traditional trades of the weaver and the porcelain maker. So the artist had to show different kind of works, and many tapestries in the Mobilier National are actually about the gesture. You can see this one in the exhibition, of course, about the large gesture of the creator. For Zawuki, it was actually interesting as well, because I was telling you some were using different formats. And for this tapestry, Jean Coural, the administrator of the national furniture in the Mobilier National, decided to have different sizes of tapestries, because he said the first woven example, measuring 6 meters wide, is very suitable for certain presentation due to its monumental nature. However, it would be nice for me to be able to have a smaller piece, which would facilitate either its hanging in numerous exhibitions or its presentation in official buildings. So the idea was that you could use every possible actually motif and recreate different works of art, and sometimes it actually changes from one to the other. And nowadays this lyrical abstraction continues, and you have this lyrical vein shown in this tapestry by Alain Sechas, where the weavers had to use so many colors, even more than the original work of art, to be able to recreate the brilliancy of the touche of the artist and to recreate this vibration. So I'm already a little bit long, but I just wanted to show other experiments. For instance, at the end of the 1960s and 70s, the new tapestry movement, which was actually a new important part of the tapestry history. After all this reproduction of paintings and so on, this dialogue with artists, a few creators and sometimes weavers themselves decided they wanted something new. And this new tapestry movement was actually presented a lot in the biennials in Lausanne, where Some weavers were actually presenting, blurring the lines between sculpture and installation. And you have here the Abacan Red, which is kind of a really enormous piece, still woven, but actually becoming a sculpture. This movement is particularly representing in some of the French collections, such as the Jean Lursa Museum in Angers. But in the National Manufactory, some artists decided to create something new. And the administrator at the time allowed some of the weavers to have an experimental workshop where they could do something new. He allowed them to have new thoughts on different reflection, and Gérard Michaud, a weaver at the Beauvais manufactory in the 70s, said, "We gave ourselves the opportunity to weave every type of cartoon on all possible and unimaginable materials, fabrics, leather, plastics, metals, for their weaving and aesthetic qualities, but also their solidity and durability." In here, you can see a plastic tapestry. It was actually made with tubes done for hospitals, so they chose the material carefully to be able to recreate something completely new with a large border, metallic border to sustain this tapestry. The idea is the technique and the knot is the same, but with plastic tubes. Other artists also decided to create three-dimensional works. For instance, this triptych by Alicia Penalba, where the black parts are actually woven and then sewn onto panels, onto wooden panels, so it actually comes up from the wall. Artists were using the technique of the tapestry. I was telling you, you do not have to have a complete straight line. So in here, some artists actually using the cuts in the tapestries. But the national manufactories always remain kind of really faithful to the two-dimensional process. And for instance, when they decided to weave the artist, English artist Sheila Hicks, which is actually known, she's known for really three-dimensional sculptures in textile, they just decided to do a two-dimensional tapestries with using the same technique as ever. And when the manufacturers want to have something in 3D, they go back to furniture and they actually explore something else and they reconnect with the tradition of seat upholstery present since the 18th century, mainly at the Beauvais manufactory, where they were actually creating tapestries for seats. And you can see contemporary artists designing things for seats and even for folding screens to be able to have new furniture, but with the technique of the tapestry. Nowadays, to finish, the national manufactories are open to all trends and artists of all nationalities. At the end of the Second World War, they mainly wanted to have French artists woven or foreign artists, but mainly residing in France. Since the 1990s, we have decided to really broaden, because of the scene, the contemporary scene is also completely international nowadays. So the idea is that we can actually buy every type of artists from all over the world. And we have a few themes. You can see the themes of nature. It's kind of interesting. This one is in the exhibition, and I'm not sure you can always see it the same way because Christophe Cousin is actually working on the pixelization of the work, and you can see from it's interesting. You can see from the window of the Gobelin manufactory. So you can see this is actually the garden of the Gobelin manufactory. You can actually see in pixelization. Many artists use the still lifes and also, the landscape themes. Some have a more realistic vein. So you can see Gilles Ayot, but we also have a great curly ray, which was made by Daniel Riberzani. So you can see some artists are actually using the still life and going back to great movement. The ray is, for instance, just like a painting by Chardin. So they can actually either recreate something really contemporary with the brush strokes and so on, like Philippe Cognier, or recreate something completely realistic. We also have, of course, this one is kind of huge and kind of impressive because you have this large face coming onto you by French artist Orlan, who is actually transforming her own face. And in here she took some photographs and digitized them using the computer to question the beauty of each possible, the different models of beauty in different groups, like the Proto-Columbian or the idea of beauty nowadays. And some tapestries nowadays are also the reflection on the medium and the transposition of the technique. In here you have Sarkis, who is actually reproducing the gestures of the Gobelin weavers at the center of his work. So you can see the hands, that it's like a mise en abîme of the creation. It's kind of interesting. And some are actually thinking about the medium. You have the matissage, and it's kind of the same, not, of course. Everybody has, I think, as a child, created things like that with paper. Well, he does that because the thread is actually between the warp and the theft, the idea, reproducing the technique inside the tapestry. The weavers also have a large possibility when creating a work of art. For instance, this tapestry was Louise Bourgeois. I was telling you, most of the time we have a large dialogue with the artist. It's not always the case. For instance, Louise Bourgeois just sent a fax to the national manufactories, a drawing. So they decided to create two versions. The first version is actually working on the number of threads. You cannot really see it. It's a little bit complex on the screen, but it's actually working on the size of the wool and so on, and it has a lot of material. The black arrows are actually really well, it's kind of a curly wool used. And a few years later, the Beauvais manufactory created something completely different, a completely graphic version. Some artists are also trying to recreate another medium inside the tapestry. For instance, you have in this tapestry by Carole Benzaken the images of a screen on TV. You also have the screen computer. I was talking to you about the borders. Raymond is actually using the border as the screen border. And artists are giving photographs made with the mobile phones. So, for instance, for this tapestry by Tania Moreau, which took 14 years, I think, to weave, because, of course, the weavers had to redo the new process for each small photographs to recreate, to rethink the colors and so on. So it's kind of an impressive piece. Some are trying to put the neon inside the tapestry, and it's also kind of impressive because you can really see the light, even though it's just wool and just a dyeing project. It's really, there is no neon inside the wool. Some try to recreate masterpieces of of tapestry with the Dame à la licorne, the lady with the unicorn and her cycle on the five senses, but this time completely blurred. And we are also working, I just wanted to show you, to finish a few American artists. So the Kiki Smith, you have the honor of seeing inside the exhibition. It was the photograph is just when it was only cut. You can actually see the threads on the bottom, which are going to be put back. We are actually sewing the tapestries at the end to be able to have something completely neat in the borders. another tapestry by Robert Kushner, where you can see the flowery creation, and also a small to finish, a small hint between our two countries from the Olympic Games in 2024, coming to Los Angeles next time. We had the Marjane Satrapi create 3 tapestries. The 3 tapestries were actually created by the 2 Gobelins, the Gobelin workshop and the 2 Beauvais workshops. Each part was actually created by a different manufactory to be able to create a complete triptych weaving for the Olympics, which is going to go in the Museum of Nice, and maybe, I hope, in Los Angeles for the opening of the next Olympic Games. Well, thank you so much for your attention. Well, I have been quite long already, but if you have any question, do not hesitate.
Can you just talk a little bit about the tradition of the weaver's mark, as well as the artist's signature, and
Oh, yes.
how they are either purposely placed before the piece is woven, or
Yes.
and what they mean? I mean, every weaver has a different mark, but
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Well, in the national manufactory nowadays, we are all the time making a mark. For the Gobelin tapestries, we are actually put a G with the spindle, which is actually the tool of the weaver. And for Beauvais, we are actually putting MBN, Manufacture Nationale de Beauvais, National Manufactory of Beauvais. And I wanted to show you this one because it's kind of the most impressive. The artist can choose to put his signature or not. And for the Riberzani, you can actually see his signature on the top with the title. Well, it's not always that big. The artist can choose whatever. This is what you can actually see on the tapestry. In Aubusson, most of the time they have what they call the bolduc. Sometimes they are creating a mark as well. For instance, the private workshop Pinton, it's actually Pinton Brothers, Pinton Frères. You have the P with an F. You can actually see on the bottom of the tapestry. And what is important, I don't know the name in English, is the bolduc, which is actually something put on the back of the tapestry, where it can says for the private workshop, it says by whom it was woven, etc., in which date and which exemplary it is. In the national manufactory, we do not sell every tapestry we create actually goes in the national collection. So as we do not sell them, we are not making. We are not writing how many exemplaries we are making because we have everything in our database. We can know everything, but we still put something. You can actually see in the show, you have the back of the Messager tapestry. You can actually see it's written the inventory number, the name of the artist, the size, and so on. So it's kind of important. What we are also creating nowadays, as I was saying, there is always a chef de pièce, someone actually being the head of the tapestry. It's actually woven on the back of the tapestry. They actually, when they create the tapestry, they begin with their names and with the date. And at the end of the tapestry, they can also put their names. I'm going to show you. You see in this part, we cannot really see it, but at the bottom you can actually see a few things. It's kismis, and this part is actually going to be woven, so we are not going to be able to see it. It's going to be on the back, but you can still see who has woven the tapestry and from when it started and when it ended, because we have the 2 dates at the beginning and at the end. Few questions.
Hi, I was really, speaking of the back, surprised to see the tails at the on the back of the
Yes.
tapestries not being trimmed. As a rug hooker, we would never do that. Why? And do different weavers trim different amounts? That seems so excessive, the one that's on exhibit.
Okay. Well, I'm not a weaver, so I'm going to be really honest with you. In the National Manufactory, we are actually, it's a state employment, so every weaver is actually, employed by the state, and everything he creates is paid for. So we do not really care if the thread is long at the back or if it's smaller. We have some tapestries. We also obviously chose this tapestry, which is kind of amazing in the back. If you look at the back of the tapestry by Sonia Delaunay, which is actually a poster, it's not going to be that interesting because the thread is going to be really tiny and at some space, some places where the color ends. The idea is that in the national manufactories of Gobelins and Beauvais, they actually wish to show their craftsmanship a lot, and sometimes use up to almost 100 colors inside a tapestry. If we were private workshops, we would definitely not use that many colors because it would be more expensive and therefore more expensive for the buyer. We are not selling our tapestries, and we are dyeing the colors inside the institution, so it doesn't really matter. The idea is just to make the tapestry as perfect as possible. So if we have to use, for the séchasse, I showed you, it's 89 colors in one tapestry, so you imagine how many dyeing process you need to create this tapestry. So yes, sometimes it depends. Nowadays, sometimes they leave long threads, sometimes not. But we also wish more and more to show the back of the tapestry. This is why I think it's really interesting in this show that you can see the back. I think it's also a wish to show also the craftsmanship and all the work done beside this tapestry.
Where are the weavers schooled?
Okay, really good question. I'm sorry, I was too quick, so I forgot a lot of things. We have a formation center, a school inside the national manufactories. The weave, actually, we do not really have a formation. It's not the same, for instance, in furniture, where we have a lot of schools where they can actually learn the craft. For the tapestry weaving, we are one of the last centers to be able to create handmade tapestries. So we have a formation inside the Mobilier National. It takes 4 years to form a new person, either to create or to restore tapestries or rugs. And then they continue, most of the time they stay inside the Mobilier National and continue on learning their crafts. And sometimes they decide to change and go in private workshops, but most of the time they are schooled and then go on working in the workshops.
So first of all, thank you so much for coming today. This was incredible and definitely educational. So I noticed when I looked at the exhibits for the tapestries that almost every tapestry that I could note had the same warp size for each of them, like the same, like the thread that they used were the same thickness. So is that consistent for all tapestries, or does it depend on the project?
No, it really depends on the project. Obviously, most of the time it's kind of the same, but when you have for instance, we have a tapestry, it's just dark lines on a white pattern, so they used a really large warp and really large weft. It really depends on the project. They are actually, the workshops are actually creating a work for the Crown of Denmark, and one of the cartoon, the artist actually created cartoon at scale, and one of the motifs is really complex, so they had to use really tiny threads, and it's way longer to weave. For instance, for the Tania Moreau tapestry, they had to have something really rather tiny, because you can see every photograph is kind of small, so if you want to be able to recreate the details, of course it's large, but if you want to be able to do this, you have to have really fine warp. It really depends, and they are using different, obviously different materials to recreate all the shapes. Of course, I suppose in Aubusson tapestries, for instance, if they are recreating the same kind of motifs, they can use mainly the main warp. Inside the national manufactories, the weaver creates everything from A to Z. The idea is that there is not one person putting the wool on the loom, then a second one creating the cartoon, and then a third one weaving. They are doing everything, so they can change for every project, recreate and decide what they are going to do. For instance, you have a tapestry inside the exhibition. I forget its name, with the small car and the arm. Schlosser, thank you so much. We have 2 exemplaries of these tapestries. This tapestry, and they were not woven in the same way, because actually the first exemplary, they say, okay, we are not sure, we are going to try it on the other sense, because as I was saying, sometimes it's complex to have diagonal curves, and you have to decide which way you are going to use that. So, as I was showing you with Louise Bourgeois as well, sometimes the weavers can completely change and do something completely different, whether in private workshops or in the national manufactory. We have a lot of same motif translated in very different versions, not using the same thing. Each time they are making a sample at the beginning of the tapestry to be able to have the artists validate or say, okay, I do not really like this part, can you do something else? And sometimes they are just trying new things. You're welcome.
I was an intern at the Gobelins studios in the 1980s, and I was there when Martine Martin wove the piece that has the car in it. Mm-hmm. And you probably know this, but it fascinated me. When she wove it, she was working on a horizontal warp loom, but in order to get the effect of the arm and its realism, she was using a technique that she needed to look at a lot. So she took the loom and she put it on its side, so it became a vertical warp loom for the time that she was working on that section. My question to you is a different one. It's about color, and my understanding that the studios have now been working for a lot of years to organize the colors, which have increased vastly since the time that Chevreul organized everything. And I remember being there once and being told that the human eye can see 8 colors for 1 that the computer can see. And I thought that that was remarkable, and I wondered if you knew things about that.
I'm not that specialist about how the eyes see the color. What I can tell you is that really in the dyeing workshop, they are really working with the eye. We have measurement tools, of course, for the color charts, where they actually can, see the hue and so on. But when they make a new batch of dyed wool, they always try to see with the eye if it's possible to continue, because we have tapestries sometimes at the beginning the weaver is going to tell, okay, I need this amount of this blue for this tapestry, and sometimes they make it to the end and they haven't finished the tapestry, so they need to dye a new part of wool, and they really do it with the eye, because this way they can be sure it's kind of the same. And for the restoration purpose, it's actually really important because sometimes we are not, the color is not going to age the same way, so they need to be sure that it's not going to be really complex for the eye in a few years because the color is not going to fade the same way. So it's kind of important. All the workshops we are working in actually have the light from the north, so the sun never goes on the tapestry. The idea is to have something when you are facing north, it's easier because you have the light but not the sun, so this way it's kind of always the same. It's kind of really important to be able to create and not change something in the meantime. Because for a weaver, when they decide at the beginning, they cannot change in the middle of the tapestry. The idea is to select everything beforehand and then weave everything. And about the technique, in the different, in the different technique, when you are working with the high loom, you can actually see the front of the tapestry. I'm going to show you again, sorry. You see in the photograph on the right, you can actually see the motif, and they are actually rolling the tapestry again, part by part. So they can actually see what they are weaving. For Beauvais, with the low loom, it's a little bit more complex, but they use a mirror underneath. I think we can see it on the film. Sorry, does not work. If they want to see the motif, they can check what they are doing with the mirror placed underneath. They have the drawing to be able to decide. The cartoon created is really like a musical chart, a musical sheet, where the composer decides at the beginning of the tapestry how they are going to translate the tapestry, and then they can check what they are doing. Sometimes with the low looms, they can actually put the loom up, but it's a really complex thing to do, so most of the time they just have a look in the mirrors, you can see, where they can see what they are doing. If they have the problem during the process and the weaving is not good, they can unweave, but it's a really long process because it's already really long to weave, so if you have to unweave and weave again, it's even longer.
My question really is about the process that precedes the artistic process. In other words, does the artist come to you first? Do you go to the artist? And who is the you? How does this happen?
So, as I was telling at the beginning, we have committees. It changed during time. I think after the Second World War in the 1960s, it was mainly the director of the institution saying, okay, I want to have a tapestry by Miro, by Derain, etc., really famous artists. Nowadays, we have committees. It depends. Either we ask the artist for a model and we decide if it's possible to translate it into a tapestry. These days, we are actually just presenting to the committee the names of some artists, mainly contemporary artists. We are not weaving back modern artists and so on. And we decide if the project is actually doable, because sometimes it's complex. I was telling you about the size of the warp. We had a project from Peter Downsborough, but we couldn't do it because it was a really large painting, and with so many details, it would have been impossible to weave, or it would have taken like 20 years to be able to weave every tiny detail. So I hope we are going to be able to do something else with this artist, but sometimes the painting is not possible to be able to translate. We have a head of creation at the Mobilier National, who is actually the one speaking to the artist, and then it's really a process with every head of workshop inside the Mobilier National, where they say, okay, this painting, this work of art, it's going to be possible to weave, this one is a little bit too complex, and which size, and so on. So sometimes they come to us, but most of the time we are actually coming to them, because it's kind of an important investment. You have a few years to make a tapestry, so most of the time we are coming to them. We have a few committees where some actually artists present some projects, but it's not always selected.
Please join me in thanking Lucile.
Well, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.